is my infancy, because we used to obviously use it on surfboards, but we would use it on the curbs when we were skateboarding.
Okay.
And so we'd like wax the curbs down so we could grind on the curbs. And so every time I smell surfboard wax, I'm just like, wow, I'm like 10 again, 12 again.
You skated a lot?
Yeah, when I was a kid, yeah. I was never good at it. It was kind of like you in soccer.
Yeah. I wish I was better at soccer.
Yeah, I wish I was a better skater.
Yeah. But
I had fun, you know, it was a lot of fun.
In Mexico, there's like a really big competition in soccer. Like everybody plays soccer. Everybody
exactly.
plays football.
Yeah. Well, that's what it was like growing up in
California and skating.
In the area I grew up, everybody surfed and skateboarded, or surfed or skateboarded. So it was like, oh, the skaters and the surfers, and and so if you didn't skateboard like where I grew up, you were like, what? You know, everyone's skating, everyone's going to the skate park, everyone's going to the beach, it's like soccer.
Yeah. And the skate scene in California in the late 90s, early 2000s influenced the world.
Yeah, like fashion, influence,
pop punk, Blink-182,
music,
for example,
culture, everything.
Yeah. Which were your favorite bands when you were skating?
I mean, Blink was one of my favorite bands. MXPX. Yeah, they were like, I got to see them at a festival in Mexico, I think.
MXPX or Blink?
MXPX. And it was so awesome because it was kind of like a reunion. And so I was like, oh my God, I'm back in my teen years, and I was rocking out, and it was so much fun. But yeah, I listened to a lot of that. I was really into punk in my early years, and then I got really into ska music.
Okay. And
I was like a little rude boy, and I was like, oh, I'm never gonna ska music's gonna be my music forever, and this is the best, and Unity and the Rude Boys and the Specials and Madness and, you know, Real Big Fish and Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, and this is my music. And then one day I heard the Stray Cats and everything changed. And I was like, what is rockabilly? Like, oh my God, like, this is amazing. They're incredible musicians. It's like Elvis. Like, this is the coolest thing. So yeah, it went like punk to ska, then to rockabilly. And then as I started getting a little older, that's when I really dove into like the Beatles and Queen and the Beach Boys and all the music of the 60s and 70s. And so I've very eclectic fascination with all kinds of music. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a point in your life that you finish listening to music of your year, and you start looking backwards. For me, I started listening to punk a lot when I was younger, and that actually Blink-182 led me into a lot of bands. I started listening to NoFX because of Blink-182, and then these guys had a song about the girl named Sarah, which actually made me listen a lot to Tegan and Sarah, which I was a really big fan. Then I started listening to Against Me because they had like a collaboration. Yeah. And now I'm actually really into pop, or like, I don't know what's the genre, but I really like Dead Cat for Cutie, for example, Manchester Orchestra, like this. Yeah. I don't know. I don't even know what's that genre. Like
kind of power pop. Like alternative pop.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think is pretty interesting. Yeah. But right now I'm starting to dig out like the Beatles and going backwards, because I have a lot of friends who are musicians who are way older than me, so they say
like, hey, you got to listen to this.
Yeah, they
like,
trash
check
my
this
music
out.
and you're like, I should listen to it, which I actually do.
Well, you realize going back to those bands, all of the bands we grew up with, you start hearing the influences of those bands in the bands that we grew up with. Yeah. And you're like, oh, wait a second. They were listening to the Beatles. You know, I mean, it's like Blink-182, for example. I mean, they're a pop punk band, but you listen to them and you're like, oh, there's no way they weren't influenced by the Beatles. I mean, they're so melodic. They're the way their music, the way they write their songs, like, and they're structured, like, they're, you know, you hear all of their influences throughout all of their music.
And they have really rich influences. Like their last album before the hiatus, the break, was really influenced by The Cure, which is also a great band. And they actually made a collab with Robert Smith. And in the early days, they were actually really influenced by The Descendants, which is also a punk band, which is really interesting because the lead singer of The Descendants was like this smart guy who was studying like a doctorate in.
There's a ton of punk bands that were like that, where the lead singer or the guitar player were, actually brilliant and had doctorates and doing all this stuff, but then they would play this heavy punk music, because
it was like a catharsis for them.
Yeah. And another, I really got into Weezer. Weezer was just like top for me. When I heard Weezer, I was like, okay, this is the best, greatest band in the world. And then there was that whole era of kind of.
But Weezer, I have a really good friend of mine who's also a really big fan of Weezer. Pinkerton was its best album or do you think?
Well, I mean, for me, it's the Blue album.
Okay.
Just because that was it's like the smell. Like as soon as you hear the opening guitar riff to My Name Is Jonas, it's boom. Yeah. And they had songs like Surf Wax America on there, Sea is Foaming Like a Bottle of Beer, I'm going surfing, you take your car to work, I'll take my board.
Yeah.
And when you're out of work, I'm still afloat. Like, it just connected with me so much because that was my life growing up. And so it's the Blue album, but as a Weezer fan, we're supposed to say Pinkerton.
Yeah. That's the politically correct answer.
No, Pinkerton's the album. I mean, Pinkerton's a great album and has really great songs on it, but El Scorcho and Pink Triangle and a lot of really great songs on that. And Rivers was like in this emotional time when he was writing that record, and so as a Weezer fan, you're supposed to be like, yeah, Pinkerton's the album. But for me, it's the Blue album.
Yeah,
and the Green album too, because I think the Blue and the Green album I listened to a lot more during that time, and I kind of had to go back and discover Pinkerton, and so I was already familiar with Weezer, and it wasn't. It's not as nostalgic of an album as Blue and Green.
But this, like, what gets me really nostalgic about these kinds of bands is that you can actually listen to an interview of the lead singer or the bass player, and you can hear substance within their words.
Oh yeah,
like it's harder for right now, like the artists who are relevant right now, it's hard to get that level of conversation. And like my job is to have conversations.
Yeah.
So for example, I listened a couple of weeks ago to this podcast of Mark Maron called What the Fuck Podcast.
Yeah, I know that one.
He interviewed the Green Day guy, Billy Joe.
Yeah.
Which was an excellent conversation.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think it's less common in this time or right now to have that level of conversation with musicians.
Yeah. I mean the
because music has become more of like just a product.
Yeah, it's more camp. There's a lot of songwriting camps, writing songs with the artists,
and producers are really in some of the cases are really the actual artists.
Yeah, they're controlling everything that's happening. Yeah, Green Day. Now that you mentioned Green Day, that was a big one for me when I was growing up too. Yeah, Dookie was like mind blowing. I was like, oh my god.
How do you deal with all this, like with the evolution of music? How do you adapt?
You definitely are. I think it's just what I'm influenced by, and if I like it and it influences me, then it usually comes through in my music. But I don't necessarily try and listen to the top 10 and try and write like that or try and get something out like that. But if I hear a song, it's usually if something that I'm putting out sounds similar to what's happening right now in music, it's not so much of trying to jump on a bandwagon or oh, that's working, so that's what I need to do. It's usually hearing something and me going, oh, that's really cool, I want to do something like that. Like, oh, this sounds really cool, So it's just if I'm influenced by it, inspired by it, that's why my music takes on so many different forms. I mean, I've got something like Fuego Lento compared to I Know, compared to, I mean, my new record has pop punk on it. Yeah. It's got singer-songwriter style stuff. It's got Latin pop. It's got artsy, Beatley Beach Boy, like it's just like an amalgamation of everything that I'm influenced by, because I love so many different types of music that I want to play what I like to listen to. I want to write what I like to listen to. And so it takes on all these different forms.